Hey guys, my name is Adam. For those of you who I've never met, I'm sad to say that I'm not going to be able to be there in person. I was traveling from Los Angeles across country to be there in time for the memorial, and unfortunately have broken down in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I'm going to miss the event. So I thought I'd send a note, initially, of course, to say, express my condolences to Mr. and Mrs. Ellingson and Mark for your loss. I know it must be incredibly hard. It was certainly hard news for me to hear. Alec was a hugely influential and kind of pivotal person in my life, and I'm extremely grateful for my experiences with him. And I thought I'd try to kind of concisely share a couple of those. I met him, as I said, at a pretty pivotal point. I was around 11 or 12 years old, I guess, in sort of the mid to late 80s, and I was living in Los Angeles for a while. And that phase of my life was pretty stressful and kind of out of sync, and didn't really feel kind of very connected in a lot of ways at home or at school and things like that. But at the core was a pretty sort of silly, kind of goofy kid, but just didn't really kind of, felt a little kind of out of my skin and disconnected. And so when I came back to Atlanta around 11 or 12 years old, my mom and stepfather had purchased this house at the duck pond, and like within a day of getting there, we got a knock at the door, and I went to go answer it, and out on the patio was this kid who was like a Viking-esque Scandinavian hulking kind of figure, but with like bushy, like wavy blonde hair and like a giant smile, and it was just like this big Scandinavian kid dressed head to toe like a Japanese ninja. He like the shoes, the pants, the full kind of get up, and I'll never forget it. And I remember thinking, well, that's kind of weird, but I also remember, looking back on it now, feeling like, oh, well, this kid's kind of cool, and like I definitely don't feel like I'll need to sort of like put up any kind of pretenses or be anything but myself, and I could just really kind of relax and sort of have fun with this guy. And we kind of instantly became friends, and of course he was next door, so we sort of lived in that kind of like little bubble of hanging out with each other all the time. And he was just kind of an amazing influence on my life. He was a pretty bright kid, and kind of sort of had been kind of exposed to things that I hadn't been exposed to, and sort of like we would kind of explore different kinds of movies and music and stuff together, and really kind of became the sort of formative stuff that really shaped a lot of my taste and sensibilities that I still have to this day. And I wasn't always the kind of easiest friend to have. We had a lot of like fun times, but sometimes I was just a pest. I was just a real pain in the ass. I was kind of a hyper kid, and kind of would poke at him and sort of like try to wrestle with him and stuff sometimes. But he was really clever at kind of knowing how to deal with that, and his tactics changed a little bit over time. Like initially, when I got into those kind of moods and would start bugging him, he would just leave. He would just stomp out and be like, whatever. And he would go through the ivy next door. And then sure enough, he knew that I would just kind of get bored. And then like within like 30 minutes, I would call him, and he would just we would both act like nothing ever happened. He would just come back, he would just kind of carry on with whatever we were doing. But what's funny is that he got more kind of efficient and effective with how to deal with that over the years. And so what he transitioned to was when I got into those modes and start with kind of poking at him or sort of like slapping at his knee or something, he would just raise his like giant size 12 or 13 combat boot foot and place it on my chest and just like push me back. And sure enough, invariably I would try to get up and sort of position or angle to sort of find my way back in and rebuttal, but he would just track me with his foot and just like up or down wherever I went. And whenever I got too close, he would just put it back on my chest and kind of push me back again. And invariably it was funny, and we would just kind of, it would get out of my system, and then we would just kind of carry on. So, he was a really kind of good friend, and we just kind of like did everything together for a while. There was this one instance that I always remember where during the late 80s there was kind of a trend somehow in hip hop and rap where like rappers were wearing these like giant hood ornaments as jewelry. And we kind of, in a sort of middle-class white boy version of trying to cash in on this trend, decided that we were going to take some wire cutters, get on our BMXs, and like canvas the neighborhood for hood ornaments that we could clip, and like God knows what we were going to do with them. So we kind of got around and got a couple, like a Buick or a Chrysler. I mean, nothing that was worth of any kind of value of interest to anybody except just the adventure of us doing it. And we got to this car up near Fellini's and up at Peachtree Road, and there was a Buick, and I was on my bike, and I was like trying to clip this thing off, and suddenly like these like college-aged guys came running out and like grabbed me, and like I was about to get like a full-on beat down, and like so they were kind of like interrogating me and pushing me around and yelling at me, and you know, after a little bit of this, off to the side was Alec, and he like yelled at me. He said, leave him alone. He like stuck up for me, and it kind of jarred them, you know. So I think they just kind of suddenly realized that we were just, you know, goofy kids, and they let us go. And so we rode our bikes back home to the duck pond and like took the one or two hood ornaments that we had actually gotten and threw them away, and like both mutually agreed that like a life of crime was just not our fit. It just was not going to be the right fit for us. But you know, some of my other fond memories actually did involve a lot of sort of, not necessarily crime, but more mischief, particularly when we kind of transitioned into driving. He had gotten a car before I did, and it was this like crazy like two-door Datsun stick shift that my memory of seemed a lot less like a car and like more like a character in a Mad Max movie. You know, it seemed to be like matte silver, like a DeLorean, and there was no seat in the front passenger side, and we just had to sit on a milk crate if there was like too many of us, and we would just drive around town in this thing, like, you know, just being crazy. And there was like holes in the floorboard, so we could like drop fireworks through the bottom. We would light them inside and then drop them down and then like watch behind us. Or we would like try to like actually catch air at Peachtree Battle. There was this really steep like ramp from the upper parking lot down to the bottom. Then you could sort of like, we would like just like haul ass and try to catch air like we were the Dukes of Hazzard. And then once we got down to the bottom, you know, in the evenings, if there were any shopping carts just happened to be floating around, we would ram them with the Datsun in the game that we coined as shopping cart bowling. So there was a good bit of mischief and just like kind of acting up and stuff like that with Alec. And we always had, you know, a lot of fun. But Alec always kind of in a way was such a great influence on me because, you know, I invariably was more prone to bad ideas. And he just wouldn't tolerate it. He was like, "I'm not doing that," or he would just he's like threatening to kick me out of the car or whatever. And invariably at the different points, you know, in those years when we were kind of adolescents or in high school, and all the years that I kind of spent hanging out with Alec, he was really kind of someone that kind of anchored me and kind of kept me on the beam, so to speak. And was kind of like, it was almost like like having a family member with me, because he just knew me so well, and he was just he was so much more sensible. So I really appreciate not only his friendship and the kind of connection and the kind of person that he was, but also sort of his influence on me on multiple different levels. After high school, we kind of had sort of gone separate ways in a lot of ways and only saw each other, you know, kind of periodically when we were both in Atlanta. But I'm really glad that in the last few years or so, I saw him more often, and we were in touch more often, and he really kind of became the sort of like my sort of the archive of my childhood. He was like the sort of like the archivist of it, because he had such this like amazing memory, you know, and so we could get together and he could remember details about things that I would never remember, and so he had that amazing mind. And like one of the great examples of this memory that he would often kind of bring up is that in high school years or so, I dated this girl for like maybe a few days named Becky. And for some reason, Alec and I were going to meet up with her, and just for some logistical reason, he ended up with her phone number, or had gotten her phone number. And so, you know, 20, 30 years later, he would still remind me that he remembered Becky's phone number and he would recite it for me. And so I really appreciated like that sort of link to those years of my life that were really some of the happiest of my life, and so that and being able to kind of recall those days with him. And so I cherish his friendship. I really cherished his influence on my life. I definitely cherish the sort of the memory that he not only would provide for me as kind of a service, but also the sort of the memories that we had as as friends over the years. And I certainly will always cherish his size 12 combat boot on my chest. So I'm sorry again that I couldn't be there in person with you guys, and hope to see you guys sometime soon.